Here we go. All right, and the last section here we're going to talk about today is the executive branch. Article 2 of the Constitution creates the executive branch. The executive branch is the president and his or her cabinet. What's the cabinet? Okay, so I have a list of this right up here. Let me actually see if I can. Man, there's that reference. I'm gonna try to expand this, make it a little bigger. Please stop blocking me. Oh no. Okay, so let's take a look at, if I can, the cabinet. So the president has a vice president. Currently, our president is Donald Trump. Our vice president is Mike Pence. There is the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Treasury, the first two cabinet positions created. And interestingly, if you're a history buff, we got Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. Okay, Secretary of Defense, who's in charge of our military, Attorney General, who is the lead lawyer. Secretary of the Interior largely has to do with national lands, forests, agriculture, farming, commerce is business, labor are workers, health and human services have to do with oftentimes creating a safe environment for people, transportation, the roads, energy, electricity, education, us, Veterans Affairs, and of course, veterans are people who fought in wars. And the most recent cabinet position was the Secretary of Homeland Security, created after the September 11th attacks on our country, as a way to better secure the homeland. And that's a really weird secretary. It's a really weird cabinet department because we don't really, I think it's still evolving. Like, what exactly do you guys do? Right? You're supposed to protect us from terrorists, but what does that mean? So the executive branch is more than just the president, but it's all of his cabinet members and his or her vice president, okay? Each cabinet member is in charge of the entire department, okay? So look, it's not like the president, whoever the president is, can do everything. No one can do everything. So what he or she does is he gives jobs to these cabinet members who are largely managers of a department. So, in the case of, say, Secretary of State, we have a guy, gosh, I can't, I'm forgetting his name. But you'll give someone a job and say, hey, it's your job to deal with relations with other countries. So you hire thousands of people who are diplomats around the world who are relaying messages from our president to the Secretary of State, who then makes sure that his diplomats are sending the messages to the separate countries. They report back to him, and then he reports back to the president. And each one of these departments is led like that. Okay, so our Department of Secretary of Defense is in charge of the entire military because our president can't do all of this. No one can. It's not just this president. No president can. This is way too much for anyone to do by themselves. So the Secretary of Defense is responsible for the entire military, and he reports back to the president. Really, the president has these 15 people who give him reports about what's happening in all of the different aspects of our federal government, and he makes decisions. So, okay, based on what Secretary of State told me, I'm going to make this decision diplomatically, or based on what my Secretary of Defense told me, I'm going to make this decision militarily. He or she can't possibly know every small detail of all of these different departments. When the Constitution was first passed, there were only 3 cabinet members: Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, and Secretary of War, which would turn into the Secretary of Defense. And we talked earlier about how many say the president's power is expanding in a large part because well, one of the things the presidents have stopped doing is asking Congress for permission to go to war, to use the military. That's supposed to be Congress's decision anytime we use the military. And to this day, Congress hasn't voted on our military being used since the Iraq War in 2003, when Congress did approve that. The use of the military. But since then, the U.S. military has been involved in a handful, maybe a dozen different countries killing people, okay? Um, and it's been the president's call. And the president says, well, I'm the commander in chief. I'm allowed to do this because, I think it's what's right for the nation. But this is really one of the areas of pull and push between the executive and legislative branch that many people would suggest have tilted in the favor of the executive, have tilted in the favor of the president. We now have a president who can launch bombs against anyone he or she wants without consulting the military first. Famously, in 2010, I think, maybe 2011, in Syria, President Obama went to Congress and said, hey, listen, I'm thinking about launching an attack on these guys because they crossed this red line. They used chemical weapons on their people or whatever. Will you agree or not? And they refused to even take it up. So now we're in this place where Congress won't even have a conversation or a vote on the use of force, largely because it's great to blame him, right? And presidents have a hard time saying no because it's like, oh, you're giving me more power. Shucks, right? Darn. I don't like power. Of course you like power. Why are you president? Okay. So anyways, this is kind of one of these areas that we're going to keep our eye on for the future when it comes to this discussion.